Okay, Sparky Tuttle and Not So Sure, I finally have part 3 up. But just a quick recap, in this multi-part sub-series we've been exploring the similarities between the Devil's Tramping Ground in North Carolina and the Delphos Ring located in Kansas. If you haven't seen part 1 and part 2, I recommend watching those first because everything will make more sense. You can find a link to part 1 and part 2 in the description, and I'll also put a link to them on the bottom of the end screen to this video. Here in part 3, we'll be going over my analysis of the soil samples I took from the Devil's Tramping Ground, as well as the results of the experiments I performed on them. So sit back, enjoy, and here we go. I took 2 soil samples from the Devil's Tramping Ground, one from inside the circle and a control sample from outside the circle. To minimize the amount of ash in the sample from inside the circle, I dug my sample uphill from the fire pit. Even so, not having a little bit of ash contamination would be practically impossible. The sample from outside the circle was taken about 50 feet into the woods in this direction. The soil from inside the circle, seen on the left, was considerably lighter in color than the soil to the right, which was taken from outside the circle. The difference in texture between the two was also quite different. The soil from inside the circle is much finer than the control sample from outside the circle. Some might even describe it as chalky, which is exactly how affected soil from the Delphos ring was described. I put the samples through a series of 3 basic tests just to see what happened. In my first test, I added approximately equal amounts of both samples to a clear glass. Next, I added about the same amount of water to each glass. Then I thoroughly stirred the contents of both glasses and set them down to observe how the contents settled. The contents in both glasses took a very long time to settle. After an hour, a whitish, foamy film had settled on the surface of the sample taken from inside the circle. Whatever this film was, it was mostly absent in my control sample taken from outside the circle. At this time, I also observed the water mixed with the control sample was considerably lighter than the water mixed with the sample from inside the circle. After about 5 days, about half of the water in each glass had evaporated, yet the water mixed with the soil from inside the circle remained a bit murkier than the water mixed with the control sample. At this time, the film on the surface of the water mixed with the soil from inside the circle was dissipating, but still thick enough to coat a few tiny air bubbles, locking them to the surface. Little, if any, trace of film and no bubbles were seen on the water mixed with the control sample. After 14 days, both glasses were bone dry. Both soil samples were equally dry and equally compacted at the bottom of the glass, which were the exact conditions I needed to accurately conduct my second test. This experiment will show whether or not the soil samples exhibit any hydrophobic properties. Simply put, if a drop of water beads at the surface before the soil absorbs it, this indicates that the soil is hydrophobic. If the soil is hydrophilic, then the drop of water will be quickly absorbed and not bead on the surface. As we can see, the soil from inside the circle does show stronger hydrophobic properties than the soil taken from outside the circle. I should note that ash mixed with soil can cause a soil sample to show stronger hydrophobic properties. I did my best to avoid ash contamination in the sample, but I can't rule out the possibility that the hydrophobic properties of the sample are due to a higher ash content than the control sample. I believe I mentioned in part 1 that previous soil tests have been unable to find any specific reason why nothing grows within the circle. So for my third and final experiment, I'm going to see if I can get anything to grow in the soil taken from inside the circle. If successful, this would seem to confirm that the soil composition is not the reason for the circle's lack of vegetation, and that there must be another cause behind the phenomenon. For this test, I'm going to be using 1 cup of just regular potting soil, and then 1 cup of the soil from outside of the circle, and then 1 cup of soil from inside of the circle. And I'm going to be using seeds from, that I saved from last year from my garden. I'm going to put in each one 2 tomato seeds and 2 different kinds of beans and 1 watermelon. And these seeds should be good because I saved them from what I grew last year. So anyway, I thought just to make sure if they had gone bad, that's why I'm planting so many different seeds in each cup. So that's the experiment, and we'll be tracking it, and we'll see what happens. Not surprisingly, the first cup to sprout was the cup with the highest quality of soil. This occurred on day 5 of my experiment. The cup on the left is potting soil. The middle cup is soil from outside the circle, and the cup on the right is soil from inside the circle. This clip represents day 5 through day 16. I only recorded days 5 through 16 because on day 17, this decided to eat everything that was growing in 2 of the 3 cups, thus nullifying the rest of my experiment. Interestingly, the 1 cup Seppi did not touch, Seppi's my cat by the way, the 1 cup he didn't touch was the one filled with the soil from inside the circle. This unexpected development raises some interesting questions though. It's reported that animals avoid going inside the circle. Is it merely a coincidence that my cat didn't touch the plants growing in the same soil from the place animals are said to avoid? There may be a much simpler explanation. Maybe he didn't touch that cup because the plants were so much smaller than the plants in the other 2 cups, and he just didn't consider it worth bothering with. I can't say for sure, and unfortunately my cat is terrible when it comes to conversation, so he's not telling me. Though the quality of the soil taken from the Devil's Tramping Ground was very poor, my experiment did prove that plants can grow in it. It is therefore necessary for science to explore other causes to the site's bizarre lack of vegetation. There are undoubtedly numerous similarities between the Delphos ring and the Devil's Tramping Ground. In summary, here are the ones that we've talked about so far. Unusual behavior in animals has been reported at both sites. Affected soil possessed stronger hydrophobic properties than surrounding soil. New vegetation would not grow in affected soil. Affected soil was completely sterile, while the surrounding soil was not. Affected soil was chalky, both lighter in color and finer in texture than the surrounding soil. More similarities may be uncovered if further tests are performed on the Devil's Tramping Ground soil. Samples from the Delphos ring proved to have highly abnormal concentrations of oxalic and fulvic acid, yet I have found no reference to either in soil analysis reports of the Devil's Tramping Ground. I'm keen to have my soil samples tested to determine the concentrations of these 2 acids specifically, but if those 2 acids were once there, they may be long gone at this point because whatever caused the Devil's Tramping Ground to have its peculiar properties happened a very long time ago. However, finding additional similarities between the 2 sites could potentially indicate that the anomalies were caused by the same or very similar processes. I am currently trying to get in touch with Phyllis Buttinger to have her analyze my samples. I'm also asking for help from the public. If you are a professional chemist who is well acquainted with Buttinger's work, and you have the means to perform the same lab tests, I will send you some of my soil samples. Contact me in the comments section and we can go from there. In part 4 of this investigation, we will go over the results of the soil analysis. Keep posted, but don't hold your breath because this might take some time. As always, my friends, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Hey everyone, Drew here from Mad Cat Mysteries, and I hope you enjoyed the video you just watched. If you did, you can click on the subscribe button below. I'd appreciate it. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.